Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Cataffo. I run West Coast go-to-market at SecurityPal. And joining us on today's episode of In Security is Matt Sharp, Chief Information Security Officer at Xactly. And today our topic is a CISO's approach to AI governance. Thanks for joining us, Matt. It's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Right on. Thanks, Mike. Glad to have a chance to chat on this, exciting and emerging topic.
Yeah, me too. Before we get into the topic of the day, would love to hear your story about how you became the CISO at Xactly.
Okay. How did that happen? I guess there's a long version and a short version. I spent a decade or so in cybersecurity consulting, and then did some travel, a couple of trips, one around the world and South America. We went back and forth as a family on whether to do that or not, and then we sort of concluded that we would do the travel. And the other alternative to doing the travel was an MBA. And when I came back, I got an MBA, which kind of inspired the book. And then during that MBA, I transitioned from being a consultant to an operator. And so I ran the global security program for Crocs, but not under the CISO title. And just prior to my role with Xactly, I was the CISO for a company that moved people to the cloud and managed their infrastructure, long tail recurring revenue. That business grew from about 17 million to upwards of 100 million, and then sold to Cox Communications. And after 5 years in the cloud, we took a brief break and built and renovated a home in Mexico. And then we were actually putting a lift kit on the Jeep because there's a river we have to cross to get to the ranch. And at that time, I got an inbound request for interviews through connections in the Vista portfolio, and I thought a compelling AI company with offices in Denver. This is a dream come true. So we totally pivoted the direction of our lives and decided to settle in and really see how we could add value to Xactly. So.
Wow. So there's a lot there. I mean, I want to talk more about this. So were you in Mexico when you were doing this? You said you were renovating a home?
Yeah. So my wife's folks are from a remote ranch in Mexico. And after we had a successful exit with LogicWorks, we spent some time down in Mexico. And about 50 years ago, my wife's father built a home, and it had spent the last 50 years basically eroding. And so we put some TLC into that place over a period of about 6 months. And then we also spent a little bit of time living in an RV. So.
Wow, real cool. Well, we have to have you back on the show. I want to hear more about South America, touring South America, and then rebuilding a home and
Okay.
the remote part of Mexico. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Starlink was the key, I think. And actually, my Starlink internet there was faster than my Xfinity is here because there was no congestion. So it was good.
Amazing. Well, shout out to Starlink for everything they do. It's incredible. Okay, well, I'm really excited about this topic. I know this must be top of mind for other CISOs out there, security leaders who are all trying to wrap their arms around AI and specifically around the governance component of this. I'd love to hear from maybe the beginning of like, was there anything that happened or any event or trigger that made you say, okay, we need to start, constructing some policies and frameworks around AI governance?
I think Rock and I talked back at Rocky Mountain InfoSec when we keynoted that conference about sort of tackling learning curves. And so at the time, I think my comments were something like, pick one of these emerging technologies. The cloud is already here. Digital transformation isn't going away. So either dive into virtual reality, dive into AI, or dive into crypto. And I had been sort of coming up on, the exit with a reasonable insight there and thinking about what was my next step and stuff. So that started me down the path of learning a bit more about like how is AI really going to impact our lives in the world. I think I joined Xactly a little bit more than 6 months ago now, and early on, there was this obviously just mounting pressure for having an answer to AI in the marketplace as a competitive differentiation. And Vista, of course, runs a portfolio of about 90 software companies, and so clearly all of these companies are receiving encouragement to put AI into their products, and then also being encouraged to transition from the previous paradigm was grow at all costs, and I think the new paradigm is obviously balancing some profit in there and maybe growing a little bit slower, given changes in the economic world and sort of valuation of software companies. So yeah, so I think the real stimulus would have been if I go to one singular event, a note from our private equity folks saying, here's some legal guidance on how to do this. And it gave a nice start to some frameworks, but obviously left some open questions that we needed to sort through and tailor for our individual businesses.
Really cool. Okay, so interesting that it came from Vista in terms of, hey, FYI, this should be on your roadmap. This should be a priority for 2024. Were there other companies or peers of yours too that you collaborated with as part of this process, like peers outside of Xactly?
I mean, yeah, sure. Like obviously CISO dinners and you know my co-author and other folks who are known to be thought leaders tackling some of the emerging issues, and often hosting like some coffee, you know, CISO coffees and things like that. So just starting to socialize definitely gave me the opportunity to sort of ask and answer questions and also see where people were at and kind of gauge our maturity versus the maturity of the broader, you know, just the broader industry, if you will. And then I think also collaboration in some of the Slack channels. So Vista obviously has a Slack channel for all of the portfolio CISOs, but also CISO Society does a really good job and has, you know, 500 or 600 leaders in there. As an advisor to YL Ventures, I have an opportunity to engage with a number of folks, and their early seed venture investments in innovative companies and an entire, you know, I think there's 100 or so advisors, CISO advisors to YL, and we occasionally get together and have conversations on various topics.
Nice. Okay, so this has been like largely community driven, and sort of folks are talking about this at different events and in Slack channels, et cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera.
and
So
and
okay,
you got to, I think you got to like give it tip of the hat to the work that I was in Mexico when Caleb Sema started doing his work, like publishing. Here's my learning path, and you know, giving links to free resources and other things that he was going to do to get his head wrapped around machine learning and AI. So I would be remiss to not, you know, nod the head to Caleb. So there you go.
well, thanks, Caleb, and I'm sure other folks would want to say thank you as well. What? Let's talk about the book for here for a minute. So I know behind you on the shelf there is the CISO Evolution, excuse me, and I know you co-authored this book. Would love to hear a little bit more about the book. Maybe there's something in there that you think is even like a interesting component that kind of ties to our topic of the day. But curious, sort of like what the I think you mentioned in your intro or your story about joining Xactly that you came up with the idea for the book, and would sort of love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for years I attended conferences and I felt like we were giving lip service to this concept of aligning with the business. You got to speak in the language of the business. And I got so frustrated because I would go talk to speakers at conferences after they got off stage and say, well, so what does that tangibly look like? How does that work? What do you do? How do you adapt? What am I doing wrong that makes it not the language of the business? And they were always very high level answers that really didn't provide much tangible, practical guidance on how to make that happen, which is why I ended up pursuing an MBA. In hindsight, did I really need to get an MBA? Probably not. I mean, certainly it helps, but I think cybersecurity leaders can gain this knowledge without one. And I think Rick Howard, for example, I don't think he has an MBA. He's clearly been very successful and risen in the ranks, and does a really good job both from a security perspective and also with the work he does with the cybersecurity canon and with CyberWire and the rest. How do we connect that to what's happening here? I mean, systematically, what we do in the book is we talk about establishing business fundamentals, thinking about how you tackle the issues of leadership and communication. And then what we did was we structured a book to start with a principle and then or an opportunity. Here's the opportunity in front of you. Here's what you could. Here's the the exciting thing that's available to you. Here's the theory behind it, and then here's a practical use case from either my career or Rock's career in consulting or as an operator. And we both kind of crisscross. So he was an operator first and went to consulting, and I was a consultant first and went to the operator role. And we tried to highlight lessons learned from successes, but also from failures, because you learn a lot more when you fail. And so I think we did a good job there. And how does that relate to the AI and governance? I mean, I think it's understanding how relevant is AI to your business, understanding how aggressively is your leadership team anticipating adoption of new technologies to drive improvements in efficiency in your workforce, as well as improvements in the value chain and how you deliver value to customers. So sort of the core tenets of the book, in my opinion, sort of relate to my approach to attempting to come up with at least one approach for how we can, put AI governance in place.
Nice, nice. So yeah, it sounds like, at least from everything I've read about the book, that there's a lot of how-tos in there, or a lot of how of taking stuff that's abstract that may not have a lot of guidance around it, and actually, like you said, using case studies and stories in terms of like how you and Rock actually went and actually like did the thing that folks
Yeah.
talk about. Okay.
Or didn't. or didn't.
or
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. And
Love
the
it.
pain that we suffered as a result of not doing that. Yeah. So,
You talked earlier about this concept of like communication. And I think that's a big component, particularly if you're putting a new framework or policy or governance in place. Like I'm curious like how you did this at Xactly, who was involved, and like how you kind of at least involved others in the process of coming up with a governance or framework for it.
yeah. Oh, gosh. How did we do it? Um, well, first of all, obviously you're going to have the technology stakeholders involved and make sure that any policy that you're coming up with isn't going to squash some competitive differentiator or planned, roadmap for the software. And then you also want to make sure that legal's involved, because as a key stakeholder, they understand risks and implications in a unique way that we don't. And so those have been probably the two starting point stakeholders to involve, to make sure, we're going to continue to accelerate the growth of the business by leveraging this technology, and then also that we're going to mitigate downside risk by not taking a misstep by, implementing something that conflicts with the AI Act that's emerging in EU, or running afoul of some of the ESG issues, or DEI initiatives that might be either present in policy or enforced via regulation, depending on which countries you operate in and so forth. So those were I think the real key stakeholders. And then I think what I wanted to do was first understand what have we implemented so far, and how does the massive amount of data that we've created, which we think is our moat, because it gives us plenty of places to train and build models and create unique insights in the world of intelligent revenue. Um, but also just to understand what is the tech stack that supports this? Are you using Databricks or Snowflake? Are you using open source stuff? What LLMs are you leveraging? How are you doing any kind of sanitization and so forth? So really understanding like how has the team thought about, designed, architected, and built was part of the conversation. And then the next piece was, because so much of this has been emerging, what are the resources out there that are talking about this in an intelligent way, whether it's Cloud Security Alliance or OWASP or NIST or intelligence agencies or foreign governments, or, Deloitte and Her Majesty's Government, World Economic Forum, The Economist, all kinds of, McKinsey has some great studies on this stuff. So starting to just kind of look broadly at geopolitical and macroeconomic, in addition to like the tech stuff.
Okay. And then, so it sounds like, I mean, I know you did a ton of research, just like pulling publicly available documentation around AI governance. And then internally, like getting the right stakeholders involved to actually like review policies and governance frameworks. What about like, I know one thing we talked
And
about.
big tech, I guess I didn't really talk about big tech, right? Like, Google, who did this stuff first, right? The FANG has done it all, right? Facebook and Apple and Google, they're so far ahead of the vast majority of the tech world. Like, they're the people to sort of lean in and look at. And then I think there are niche pieces of research, like the not with a bug, but with a sticker, how to attack AI ML. And there's another book on uh, high risk applications in machine learning, and just kind of getting my head wrapped around what have other folks who have been dealing with this for a significant amount of time already published and learned.
Nice. Okay. What about like I know one of the things too, there's like the product considerations, right? In terms of like customer facing, any like how you're using AI in your product. And then there's also the considerations of like how employees of Exactly are using it. Like I'm curious, like were both of those considerations in terms of like how you develop governance around this?
Yeah, for sure. So the Cybersecurity Collaborative is another one of those sources, and they provided some really good thought leadership, which kind of helped me start thinking about the use cases of AI in our business. I started to see inbound requests and feedback and responses to some of the early legal guidance that we had put out. And so, we had. I'll give you an example of something that we're actively doing. We're a customer of 6sense, which is a well-known sales and marketing tool that helps you understand inbound lead flow based on signals that come from your website and other places. And we've been able to leverage that to identify opportunities for our third-party risk management program to engage sales on high probability deals with open opportunities that are going to close in the next couple of months, right? So this is interesting because it has given us an ability to not look at the entire sales cycle or not necessarily worry about early stage deals, but instead focus on late stage deals that also have outside indicators that there's a high probability to close. And so that's just one use case, right? We also have done some work with Visotrust to leverage NLP to parse third-party SOC 2s and other things to make a much more efficient procurement process for the business. So it's not just us, right? Everybody else across the business is leveraging this stuff. The reps want to be able to automate crafting emails to sort of accelerate the number of people that they can reach in a day. And we talked about marketing tools already, but in operations, obviously you've got folks who want to leverage ChatGPT to help them write copy for promoting the business, or write code for accelerating development cycles. And then that's just that's not developing code that serves our customers. That's just how do we accelerate productivity inside the business, right? And we saw a lot of folks starting to ask questions like, hey, Matt, is it okay for us to use this tool? And so obviously that put pressure on us to come up with a systematic way to consistently ask and answer that question and put reasonable constraints that both, again, facilitated growth and aligned with legal constraints that exist.
Okay. And how did you control? Like, I'm curious. I know one of the things, the challenges out there for a lot of security leaders is just this concept of shadow IT, where it's easy for somebody to just go buy or do a free trial or start using something that's cloud based. It's really easy to sign up. A lot of these things you can just put a credit card in. It's $30 a month or whatever. How do you coordinate with other leaders within the organization to make sure that like you balance like the ability for folks to get productive with also the risk of just like using tools that like you may not even know folks are
Yeah.
using.
I mean, I think there's a lot of tools out there that have been around for a long time, right? You've got the CASB category, if you will, that has an ability to, or URL filtering, or just other basics, and you start to classify an entire category of tooling. I mean, there's so much emerging right now. The reality is, it's got to be some kind of combination of uh, hiring the right people and putting the right kind of policy and education in place, plus some kind of technical detection and for folks who either are not aware or who have actively chosen to not follow the policy. Um, but yeah, it's certainly a challenge. I think there's opportunities in what extensions do you allow in your browsers and a handful of other places where you can start to put mitigating controls. Um, but yeah, it's something that I think the entire industry is grappling with right now.
Okay. Okay. What in terms of your actual governance policy, like what were some of the things in your research that you came across sort of like where the Venn diagrams overlapped where you're like, okay, here are a couple core tenets or takeaways for listeners of like these absolutely should be part of your policy. And then maybe some other ones where you're like, could be relevant, may not be relevant. It depends on your business type
Yeah.
of.
Well, I mean, I thought, uh, first of all, like you said, there's going to be people who ask for permission, and there's going to be people who ask for forgiveness, right? So let's facilitate, first of all, the people who are asking for permission, and make sure that we've got a clean register and inventory and meaningful criteria to evaluate the tools for people that are asking to, like, to keep things on the up and up. Um, and I think that's where we wanted to start, right? Because even if you end up identifying people doing things that they shouldn't be doing, you still have to be able to, in an explainable way, describe why the tool that they're using is not acceptable, right? We're using some kind of objective criteria. Uh, so that whole concept of an AI governance board with an inventory of the applications that are in use and a core set of attributes sort of cropped up again and again. You got to know, you can't protect what you don't know you have. Um, then I think, when I start to think about the work that came out of either NIST, like AIRMF, or their risk management framework, or the work that Google did with their SAFE program or responsible AI from Microsoft, those tenets around the ethical use of AI and the use cases, and kind of setting before you get there a clear boundary on what's acceptable and what's not, I think is pretty consistent, right? We've seen recent enforcement actions already against Rite Aid from the FTC on basically racist use of loss prevention monitoring software, and I think enforcement actions from these large entities can be debilitating. And for us in software, if we were told you can't use AI technologies in order to create competitive differentiation for a 5-year hiatus because we ran afoul, like that could be a certainly a career limiting move, but beyond that, it could be a company ending. And so I think we want to make sure that we're not running afoul of those core ethical boundaries, and having clear in our own mind, how do we ask and answer those questions? Um, yeah, for sure. That I think, I thought Google did a good job in the way that they presented putting their framework in place, and it also not being the person that has to say no as the CISO, right? It's not my job to say that's unethical. It's an entire company's job, and we've got to have the right stakeholders at the table considering these things. And so I think having that governance board in place probably also pretty key, and kind of frequently repeated across all the different frameworks that I looked at. I think that OWASP took a much more technical approach to sort of attacking and protecting, which is what you would expect. Um, and so I think the those folks that wanted to tackle the governance piece came at it from one angle, which was a top down, and then the other set of folks that came at it from a bottom up, like OWASP and like the the guys for not with a bug but with a sticker took a much more attack and pen approach, which was kind of, I mean, there's two approaches in cybersecurity. There's a threat approach and there's a risk approach. And I think the two have to marry somewhere. So,
Okay. What any in terms of like things you came across in your research that you were like, nah, this is interesting, and I could see how it's relevant for financial services or healthcare or whatever, but not relevant for us in terms of like part of your AI governance
um,
policy or things that you just
like
didn't put
the
in.
AI Act talks about some sort of, I think they call them high risk applications that they're just not going to allow. And they talk about some very sort of big brotherly type of monitoring use cases that China has actively put in place, right? I mean, I think they say that they won't allow that, and I think Google says that they won't support that or allow their products to be used in supporting that kind of use case. Um, I mean, what we do is we help businesses design and calculate compensation management for reps and territory management and stuff like that. So I think those boundaries on like uh, intense surveillance probably weren't super applicable to me, and I probably read those with a bit of and on one hand, a grain of salt because it wasn't super applicable to the business, but on the other hand, it's like very interesting to see what other countries with diverging value systems, find okay and are okay to implement. So
Totally. Okay. What I think one of my final questions is really around you. I know you went through a process where you did a ton of research, gathered a bunch of documentation, and then uh, that basically took that to basically come up with some type of governance framework. Was there anything in that the governance council had exactly said, yeah, no, we don't need this, or we should throw this out, or we need to really change this? Anything that shocked you in that process, or something that you were like, oh, yeah, no, that's interesting, like in terms of how you iterated to get to like the final a framework that you came up with?
well, I mean, I think it's fair to say we expect this to be a living, moving document. I think our approach was, like I said, to start with technology and legal probably as a foundation, present that to our Information Security Council and get commitment. And that's comprised of our senior executives in finance and CEO and such. Um, the takeaway was I wasn't certain how we were going to do things, whether we were going to be like a risk and security AI governance committee or whether we were going to participate in a broader governance committee. And so obviously, on one hand, you get broader exposure to sort of educate and learn in a broader audience, and on the other hand, um, less of the conversation is focused on you, right? We see 15 minutes a quarter from a board perspective is pretty typical for CISOs, and I'm sure that other CISOs that end up in a broader AI governance board are also going to see, a very complex set of issues with tons of reach on ethics and risk and attacks and all this other stuff get compressed if they're participating in a broader audience. So um, I don't know. I mean, it's still early days if we're honest, right? I think there's still a lot to be learned.
I think part of it was, and one of the things I was, when we did our pre-interview, was really around using AI to construct the framework. But really, what I was curious about, was there anything in there that you were like, oh yeah, this is interesting, or like something that the council just scrapped, or something that we're like, yeah, no, doesn't even make sense, or we need to take this out? Anything from?
We did some wordsmithing for sure on like what's the scope and applicability, and we took
Mhm.
some stuff from our secure development side and we moved it over to this is really a workforce enablement. I think obviously I took a lot of this research and fed it back into ChatGPT, GPT-4, and said, hey, based on this stuff and these core categories, which is basically my policy structure, write a policy for me, um, and
I
then
love it.
and then we refined it from there. So I don't remember totally the redlining process from there, but I do remember because it was more recent, the back and forth, like I said, with some of the nuanced language on what exactly is the scope of the committee, what exactly is the scope of this policy, where are the boundaries, what kind of enforcement actions do we want, and so forth. Yeah, and unfortunately, I've set my GPT policy to not remember my chats, so I can't go back and look at that. But you know,
All good. Well, I know timing wise, we are out of time. I thought that I absolutely love this discussion. I hope others will have gotten a lot out of it, and really appreciate having you on the show, Matt, and really enjoyed it.
cool. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, take care.